Welcome to Construction Trailblazers, the podcast that gets real about leading people, managing projects, and simplifying growth in the building industry. I'm Samantha C Prestige, and I work with construction and trade leaders who need to untangle back office chaos so you can have less firefighting and more traction. You can catch past episodes at constructiontrailblazers.com and find the practical strategies for building a business that runs smoother. Today's guest is Andy Bergman. He's a leadership trainer and communication coach who works with companies to help their teams have the tough conversations they usually avoid. With a background in HR and operations, Andy specializes in turning high conflict, low communication environments into places where leaders can actually step up with clarity, empathy, and accountability. His work bridges the gap between field performance and people skills, so companies don't have to choose between profit and culture. All right, Andy, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm glad you're having me, Sam.
So, okay, you have this interesting background in HR and ops. So walk me through, I guess, your journey and what led you to focus on these things now.
Yeah. I was working for a 150 employee construction company, mechanical contractor, and I started working in the shop, went from the shop to project management, and went from project management to HR. And that was over probably an 8-year span. And I remember being new in the HR role, and I got a call from an apprentice who said that he didn't like working with his foreman. And my first thought's like, get over it. It's work. Shut up. You're an apprentice. But he, because the thing is we liked the foreman. His jobs did really well. They were profitable. The general contractor really liked him. He was organized. He was very responsive. So on all accounts, he was awesome. But this apprentice didn't like working with him. He said he was micromanaging and he didn't enjoy, like he would hover over him, over the apprentice, and he was really harsh with feedback and he would come off as rude. And anyways, so I ignored it. And a couple weeks later, and remember, this is me new in HR.
Yeah.
A couple weeks later, I get a call from another apprentice and same thing. He says, I want to go to a different job. And so I was visiting with the other leaders in the company and I had asked, should we visit with this foreman? We can call him Fred. And they say, yeah, we should. And so he had been a foreman for several years at this point. So we bring him into the conference room one afternoon, and it's me being HR, another manager to my left, and the Fred is across the conference room table. And we are awkward. Like, how do you tell somebody nobody likes you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, heart rate is up, sweaty, like probably super choppy word. I don't remember exactly what we said to him, but essentially we say the apprentices were getting feedback. They don't really like you. You need to change. And he looked at us and he said, how long have you guys known about this? And we're like, easy now with the hard question. I don't know. So whatever, it's been a couple of years. And so I'm looking down because I'm awkward and I don't really want to look at him, looking at the wooden table. And I look up and he's looking at me and he's crying, has tears in his eyes. He said, why didn't you guys tell me? And I thought, good point. I don't know why we didn't. And the interesting thing, or not interesting, the frustrating thing is when we don't have these kind of conversations with people, it doesn't benefit Fred. It doesn't benefit the apprentices. It doesn't benefit the job. Like, it benefits nobody except for one person. It benefits me because I don't have to be uncomfortable. So it's selfish, isn't it? And so with giving feedback or having hard conversations, oftentimes the reasons we avoid them, and especially in a leadership capacity, is out of selfishness.
Yeah.
I don't want to be uncomfortable. So that's where it started. I don't even remember what you asked me now. But
Well, no, I asked, what kind of led you to want to focus on this work? And it sounds like that was just a very instrumental moment in your leadership journey, right? And I mean, I can think of several clients where I come in and they're like, hey, Sam, can you play the bad guy? I'm like, what do you mean by that? They're like, oh, well, I just don't want to have to tell this person XYZ. Like, can you just, this leader wants to stay as he wants his presence to just kind of be the fun person, right? And like, cool, but also I'm not going to be here forever. Like, I can maybe help you with the hard combos now. Happy to do that. Like, if someone needs to look at me as the bad guy, okay. But eventually I will leave and you will have to have these conversations with future employees on your own. Okay, so this happened, we're talking kind of 8 years into your professional career, still kind of new to HR though. Kind of take me through what happened next for you. How did that maybe change how you continue to show up in HR? And then how did you even get into now coaching?
Yeah. So back to Fred, there was some pretty cool changes, and I wouldn't say that we communicated it well with him, but we did communicate something. But he took that to heart, and he didn't want nobody to like him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who wants that? So he really took it to heart, and it's cool to see those changes. And we stopped getting that type of feedback. Um, but from there, working in HR capacity, that was part of all kinds of different conversations, some of them shallow and some of them deep. And I found that in our construction company, many times a lot of the issues and the drama and the headaches came down to a lack of good communication. And so I thought about this a lot, that the people there, the leaders there weren't bad.
Mm.
They were top-notch, stellar people in their trade, but they didn't know, and I didn't know either. How do you have these conversations? How do you hold your peers accountable? How do you negotiate change orders with the customer? And I ended up taking a position with another company and in employee development capacity, which is just a fancy way of saying I did training. And so I essentially did communication leadership training full time there. And visiting with the owner there after about a year, we had a conversation. They had sort of encouraged me, you should either go on your own and do this and sell it, or you should sell it on our behalf. Go out to the market. I think there's a market value there. So anyway, so then there was a little bit of a transition there. And so now I work with construction companies all over the US. I'm teaching communication skills, how to say the hard
And
thing.
you said something interesting, like you just didn't know how to have these tough conversations. We're touching a little bit on accountability, touching a little bit on communication. But if I go back to Fred, also what I heard in that story was he just didn't have a certain level of awareness, of at least self awareness of how he was coming across. If we talk about the elements of good communication, because I think that that can also feel a little buzzwordy up in the clouds for some people. Kind of bring down, are there bullet points? Are there just simple elements here? What makes up good communication?
Communication can be a buzzword, and I think it is. I think by nature it's all rooted in like soft skills or people skills, and that's probably why it seems that way. Communication at the foundation is simple, though. It's just the sending and receiving of information. Communication is simple, but the reason why we make it complicated as humans is because we have these things called emotions, and
What are those?
we put a spin on things, and we make assumptions, and we feel certain ways, and we have this thing called our ego and our pride that makes things messy. And so communication is just learning how to send and receive information in order to solve problems. Well, not only to solve problems, there's other uses for it, but in the capacity that I teach it in, it's to solve problems.
So then how does self-awareness then kind of play into what you're teaching? And I'm assuming, hey, we've got to really understand our emotions. We've got to understand if our pride is at play here or not. So how are you walking your clients through that? Because I can also imagine this gets a little therapeutic for some.
Yeah. I think there's a vast difference between coaching and therapy, but that being said, I've heard folks say it does feel like therapy because you start to say how you feel. Um, think of it like a big mirror. This is how I help my clients. I put a big mirror in front of their face in the communication capacity and help them see how they're part of the problem. Because if we have communication problems, whether it's with our spouse or at work or with our customers, if you always blame the other person, by default, you're a victim. And when you're a victim, you give all your power away. And so my goal is to get them to retain their power so then they can do something about it. And I understand that there's relationships that are hard and there's the other side that will not participate in good communication. But I think no matter what, we can retain control of how well we communicate, how well we listen, how well we do all of the things. I had a client probably last year sometime. We were going over the topic of humility and ego and how it relates to communication, because I think communication breaks down oftentimes because our pride gets in the way. We start to prioritize our image first more than solving the problem. And at the end of the course there, he had said, I didn't even think I had an ego. He said, now I know that I do. I just have to learn how to control it. And so maybe that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, well, I would also argue it's not just about learning how to control it. Like, that's maybe step two or three. And step one there is really realizing when he's poking his head out, right? Like when he's just kind of prairie dogging or being a meerkat and poking out into the situation. Because if you don't recognize those moments, then it's also easy for humility, or in your attempt to be humble, for it to then just be low self-esteem rather than like, where are your boundaries, or where should your confidence be playing up in this type of situation. But I'm also hearing that it's focusing more on what can you control, what is within your control, whether you are identifying as the victim or someone that maybe has the power to change the dynamic here. Is that kind of accurate to how you teach communication with your clients?
Yeah, I think humility without confidence isn't humility. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not self-deprecation, but it's like, maybe to relate it this way, when you're in a tough conversation, do you want to be right or do you want to solve the problem? Like maybe that'd be like an ultra simple way to put it. And getting people to even realize that is huge steps forward.
It took me a long time to realize that. I actually would throw that at my husband sometimes in arguments, and I'd be like, "You care more about being right than solving the problem." And then I'd take a step back. I'm like, "Oh no, I care about being right in this
Yeah.
situation." Like my ego's definitely playing a bigger part in this conflict than it should. Now, you also said that maybe part of why you avoided those conversations was just not knowing how to have them. Do you think that there's other elements of why leaders, and specifically leaders in construction and in the trades, just avoid these tough conversations in general?
I think it's a lack of skill, like you already mentioned, but more so when I visit with people why they avoid hard conversations, they always like project the excuse on the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll tell you what I mean by that. If I ask Bob, why won't you go talk to Fred? He says, I don't want Fred to feel bad.
Mm.
And, we don't want them to get hurt. We don't want them to be upset. We don't want them to cry. We don't, whatever the reason is. But in reality, I think I don't want to be blamed for you feeling bad. Because if, let's say you're my employee, Samantha, and I have to give you some tough feedback, it's for your benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Or it should be. That should be the intention, is to give it to you for your benefit. But if I avoid it and I say, well, I don't want Sam to feel bad, I think take that at a deeper level, and I don't want you to blame me for feeling bad. And so a lot of that it's rooted in selfishness. And so when people avoid conflict and avoid hard conversations, I found it is almost always some sort of internal issue with me. I can coach people up to a certain point. I suppose there could be a point where people could be like referred out to therapy to take a deeper dive into some of those things. But
Yeah, part of what I do is also look at processes, right? And how can we improve processes? And in order to do that, we have to understand what's wrong. So there's a lot of kind of conflict resolution that happens in the early stages there. And sometimes it's also tough for people to walk the line of you're not responsible for how someone receives the feedback. Like ultimately, their feelings are their feelings, but also, maybe you could take a few steps in the try to good human direction and try to like uh,
Mhm.
give this feedback in a nicer, at least respectful and polite way. And then we go into like the Brene Brown infamous quote of clarity is kindness for the clients and managers that you work with. How hard is it for them to kind of really realize the difference between those two things?
I agree with the quote, clear is kind. I think the challenge of being clear is the hard part, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If I were to tell you, Samantha, you are lazy and you're not a good fit on this team, that may be direct and it could be partially true, but it's not clear.
Mm-hmm.
What do I actually mean? What behaviors are you showing? That's the problem. If I were to tell you things like you respond to Slack messages in like 3 or 4 hours, and you've been showing up to meetings consistently 20 to 30 minutes late, and when our work is due on Friday at 5 p.m., you're not sending it in until Saturday sometime. Like, if I can break down these specific behaviors, it makes it so much easier to deliver that with empathy, because you're focusing on the problem, or the problem itself, and not attacking the person or attacking their character. So when Brene Brown says clear as kind, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I think the challenge is finding that clarity before you communicate.
Well, yeah, then we got to get clear on what exactly is clear, right? Like I was talking with someone before, they also do process improvement, and we talked about how you can't just tell people we want to make things better. You have to define what better even means. Like that's not clear enough for the objective here. I like what you're saying about really breaking down those specific actions, and we're focusing on the what of the problem rather than the who behind the problem. So I want to bring this down into the practical business application here, because now I'm a strong proponent of be a good human in business. And I absolutely love really focusing on the people side, but also I've got to play devil's advocate a little bit of, okay, what is the real benefit? Obviously, we don't want Fred crying in our conference room, right? We don't want that for our culture. But when we look at like the business benefit on paper, help me understand that. So people that do focus on communication, that focus on conflict resolution, what are the benefits that they're seeing on their projects or on their bottom line or elsewhere in the business?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's difficult to articulate that. Exactly what, I mean, if it's, I'm going to teach you how to communicate and you're going to increase your revenue by $100,000, like that's a challenging thing to do. But let me put it this way. If you have a foreman on a job site that can communicate well, meaning he knows how to set expectations for the guys and the crews, he knows how to teach them and coach them to do the work quickly and do it accurately with good quality. He's able to keep a safe job site. He's able to get people to buy in to his leadership, meaning they'll go above and beyond without him having to push. They want to follow him on their own free will. Like all of these micro things added up, it's going to contribute to a higher productivity on the job site. And higher productivity means less labor cost, and less labor cost means higher net margins. And so how to put actual numbers to that is difficult, but I know there's a correlation there. And just maybe as a small example, I was working with a superintendent a couple of months ago that was a really, really good tradesperson, but wasn't so good with people and so good with communication. And his default was just to avoid conflict at all costs. Not that he would always do it, but that was his default. And so he had a worker at one point that was just being super disrespectful and essentially just wouldn't listen to him. And in the past, that would just get ignored. And after going through some training and giving him some confidence, he started engaging in conversations with that on-site employee and turned the behavior around where he started to listen. He engaged into that conflict without being pushed. And so the hard part is a lot of these issues, we don't even know they're going on. But after he had some confidence to have those conversations, then you can turn the issue around.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is like we not only have the potential to overall do better, whatever that means for your project, but overall do better on projects and maybe stick to schedule, increase the bottom line. But I'm also hearing like we have the chance to not have high turnover as well. Are you seeing any correlation there between communication skills in leadership and management and how long our laborers stick around, or maybe other managers kind of stick around in a reduction in turnover there?
Yeah, I can't say I have like bulk data to measure that, but my clients have told me that people haven't quit because of the results that they've seen with communication. And on the other hand, I've heard from a recruiting effort that folks have applied to these companies because they know that the company invests in leadership and communication training.
Hmm.
Um, so again, I don't have any like massive
Yeah,
data
yeah.
to look at that, but that's what I've heard from my clients. Yeah,
Which is always like great feedback, right? Of like, okay, there we do see some kind
yeah,
of business results happening here. Now, I also want to take a
yeah.
step back to your background in construction. Help our audience understand how specifically communication training and understanding emotional intelligence might differ in the construction world to maybe other industries, and why clients should specifically be like, oh, we got to bring in Andy for this rather just a general communications or leadership person.
Yeah. There's not very many of us that have niched down to construction in the communication world. I've met a few others. Emotional intelligence, for example, it feels very fluffy. Like, what is it actually? And I think it takes somebody that understands construction and understands their pain points and their problems to influence them. So if I were to come in to a company, I would use language and use scenarios and examples that would really hit home for them rather than just like a generic, let's role play this random conversation. Um, and getting down on their level for sure. What I've noticed with, and maybe this is going down a rabbit trail here, but with communication training specifically, they've done studies on training dogs. And stick with me here. They've noticed that if you're training a dog, if you give it a treat instantaneously after they do the thing, it learns very, very quickly. But if you wait 10 seconds, the learning takes about 3 to 4 times longer. And if you wait over a minute to give it the biscuit or the treat, it almost never learns. And so my point being that I think humans are the same, that we got to make this feedback loop super, super short. So when I'm teaching emotional intelligence or teaching active listening, if I can give the feedback like less than 10 seconds, they're going to learn really, really quick. And so my approach is really hands-on with these folks in the field to give them feedback in real time as they're experiencing it. And of course, they got to engage in it and they've got to want it too. But
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you can bring the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Now, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit here because I hear there was another fluffy word or phrase that I heard. So you said emotional intelligence felt a little fluffy for at least the people you're working with, but I also heard you say active listening. And I think and I agree with the concept of active listening, but I think for many people, it's a bit of a leadership buzzword. And the execution of it often falls short. So I'd love to hear what's your perspective or your own definition of active listening, and what are you expecting from your clients when you are teaching that?
yeah, some of the feedback I've gotten from my clients is the skill they take home the most is active listening. We just take the active out of it. We can just call it listening if you want to. Make it feel not so much like a buzzword. How I would define listening is making someone else feel heard. And again, that kind of feels buzzy or fluffy sometimes too. Um, but listening is simply understanding the other person's point of view. And what has been helpful is trying to take a topic that maybe is more controversial. So let's take gun control, for example. People typically are really for gun control or they're very against gun control. And so with my clients, I try to understand what side they're on, and usually it's pretty polarizing. And then I want them to active listen with me pretending I'm on the other side, regardless of what it is. And so when we're listening, actively listening, you can't disagree, you can't show your opinion, you can't show any judgment. The only thing you can do is try to understand. And so if I'm talking to a pro-gun person, I will play the role of anti-gun and give them a chance to practice listening. Because when you passionately disagree, it's very, very challenging. And so if they can master the skill in that context, some of these really small minor issues at work or at home, they're not so hard.
I actually really appreciate that approach of like, let's just dive in with something like the hardest level. Because once you've climbed the mountain, everything else is going to feel easy, right? Now, what I'm hearing there is that in order to really listen, there has to be kind of this neutral curiosity at play. Is that true?
Yeah, and I would push back too that the neutral curiosity probably also feels fluffy. Um, but essentially, but it's hard, right?
Hmm.
This is our world. We
Hmm.
use all kinds of language that a lot of times doesn't resonate. But ask questions without showing your opinion.
Hmm.
Like the other person shouldn't even know what your opinion is. Like that's how neutral you should be when you're in this
Well,
active
that would
listening mode.
sound almost robotic to me. And that to me would sound also like, okay, how do I make sure this person feels heard if they don't feel as though maybe if they don't feel that I'm engaged in the conversation. So, where at least then as the listener do my emotions get to play a role in the conversation?
Yeah. The active listening role is very temporary. And we can go back and forth for sure. But how I teach folks is most people aren't trained on how to listen. And to have an open conversation, it actually only takes one. And so I'm training my clients to be the one to listen. And so you take on that responsibility of being a listener. You don't disagree. You don't show your opinion. You don't show any judgment. And what you're doing is you're pulling the other person into the conversation. And they're throwing out their opinions and they're getting engaged. What will happen is they will naturally start to ask for your opinion back in some sense. And once the conversation is safe or once it's open, then I think you can have just open dialogue. But if the conversation starts where I throw my opinion at you and then you throw it back, and then I throw it at you, like then we never get anywhere. And so I got to put all my defenses down, pull you into the conversation, make you feel heard. Actually,
Hmm.
like that's why you can't know what my opinion is. I mean, you can, but I just teach it black and white because it's easier for people to learn that
Hmm.
way. Like, make it your goal to not let them know what your opinion is and pull them in, and then we can actually talk about it. So then in the work context, if me and you are talking about if we should bid this job or not, and you come in, Samantha comes in and says, we need to bid this job. And in my mind, I'm thinking, my goal should be to try to understand why you think you're right before I even give you my opinion. And by the time I've pulled all the information out, I've either changed my mind because you've convinced me, or you're now at a place where you want my opinion. I don't know if that makes sense,
No,
but
it does. And I think what's great about that example, if, as the listeners, if they didn't catch it, was this was pulling in conflict resolution skills into an everyday conversation, right? An actual conflict hasn't happened in that scenario, but you can still use those skills to prevent a conflict and just have healthy disagreement or just good communication overall. And there's a few things that you also said there, like putting your defenses down, right? That's where putting your pride away and being humble is going to play a really big role. And usually our pride is like the first trigger. That's the first thing we feel. And so our, I think, internal reactiveness to put that away has to be very quick. Now, you also said it only takes one active listener in a conversation to kind of move things forward. So I'm curious, not that I want to advocate for like working you out of a job with some clients, right? Hopefully, we've got some repeat clients and we're able to come back and kind of teach things as new employees come in. But I can also see, okay, if it takes one, and we've got this one, at least one manager on this team that has these skills, then these employees can kind of learn by example, right? And they can kind of pick up on these skills. Are you seeing that kind of trickle down or waterfall effect with these skills over the long term with clients?
I've been in business for 3 years. My longest client has been a year and a half, and so I don't know that I have enough time to like really answer that accurately.
Mm.
But I think you're right. These skills, if they're modeled well, people will learn just based off of that. I think with communication, for most of us, it was never modeled super well, whether it was our parents or from bosses or teachers or whoever. I think if we had somebody, for example, that was really good at setting expectations and holding us accountable our entire life, we are more likely to do that with people at work. But I don't think most of us experience that.
Yeah. Well, it'd be
Based on the people that I know I've worked with.
for most people, we're starting from total scratch, right? And that's where we teach in black and white, it sounds like. So, all right, we've touched on a lot of different kind of tidbits and strategies here of putting your pride away, active listening, really not being afraid to have the conversation, closing that feedback loop time frame. If there was any other piece of advice or one small thing our listeners could start with today to be a better leader and to be a better communicator, what would that be?
I think the most profound communication skill is listening. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And I can break down the listening skill, from silence to open-ended questions to reflecting, paraphrasing. There's a lot of different things. Chris Voss teaches a lot of good things on listening. Simon Sinek does as well. But to make it super tangible, next time you're in a conversation with your kids or a spouse or at work and you disagree and you feel like some sort of conflict coming on, try to hide your opinion. And it's going to be hard because it feels good to get our opinion validated. It feels so good to be right, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I would rather be right than make $100,000. I don't know,
Well,
our pride does that.
I hear you. Sometimes.
In the emotional moment,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Right now, but in the moment, do you want $100,000 or do you want to be right? It's easy to be no, I want to be right. And so, yeah, my suggestion would be, and this could be with a 6-year-old kid. And I know as a parent you have to create boundaries and you have to teach, but try to just hide your opinion from them and try to ask questions. It's profound how well it works.
Yeah. Oh, because kids pick up on all of the tiniest signals so quickly. So my kid, when he's walking up to me, he can see all of my facial expressions before he even says the thing he wants to show me or asks me a question. And so that's a really big challenge for me to work on. And I would argue if you don't have someone to have controversial conversations with and you don't have someone to talk about gun control with, then that highest mountain to climb is the conversations in the home. Because for most people, this is in my assumption and observation, totally my opinion here, but I think for most people, we put a lot of energy and facade into how professional we want to come across, whether or not we're good communicators or not, but at least wanting to be very professional in the workplace. And that takes up so much energy that then all of the communication skills and also all of the little triggers you have from your childhood or whatever, all those pop up in all the conflicts that you might have at home. And so if you can hide your opinion in some of those home-based conversations and conflicts, then the workplace stuff is going to be a piece of cake, right?
Totally. And to clarify too, you don't have to hide your opinion forever.
Yeah.
Your opinion is good and it's valid and you need to have an opinion. Just hold it in for a little bit. Listen first.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell my kid that his picture is trash right up front. I'll just, 2 weeks after it's been on the fridge, I'll be it's time for this to come down.
Yep.
We don't need this anymore.
Exactly.
All right, Andy. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you and stealing some of your wisdom today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate you having me. I enjoyed it as well.